Hello, I'm Moritz. I'm here to talk a little bit about frameworks for building open source companies. Before we get into that, a little bit of my background. I started and sold a company called CodeShip. CodeShip is a CI/CD as a service product, developer tool, proprietary, and not open source at all. And we had a bottom-up adoption model where we had free tier and developers came in and then put in their credit cards and purchased. And eventually we upsold them through our sales teams and did team-wide, company-wide deals. Since the acquisition of the SVP operations and corporate development at Cloudbees, Cloudbees is an end-to-end DevOps platform. You probably know Cloudbees because of Jenkins. We're the open core vendor behind Jenkins, and Jenkins is the continuous integration market leader. Depending on the market's data and survey you trust, it serves more than 70% of the market. And we are serving the world's largest companies, Allianz, Bosch, HSBC, Intel, many others. So quite different from CodeShip. Where we had this bottom-up model, we're proprietary, Cloudbees is open source, and very enterprise-focused and has an end-to-end platform. I talked about Jenkins and CI. Cloudbees does many other things, also as a CD product, feature flag, feature management, analytics product that sits on top of a DevOps toolchain, so many other things. So quite different, but I think those experiences combined give me a really unique point of view. And when I look at building open source companies, I look at it through the lens of an entrepreneur and founder, which is probably not surprising to you. Open source helps me solve problems, create an impact, and make money. So I'm quite rational about it, not thinking about it in any political, religious sense. I don't think all software should be free or any like that. I primarily look at it as a tool that helps me build better products, better technology, help more developers. And with that in mind, I think open source works for specific markets, primarily B2B and especially B2B with technical audiences. I don't think that open source works for B2C products. I don't think if you believe you will build the next TikTok by differentiating through open sourcing it, I don't think that works. Technical audiences don't care about open source. Consumers don't care about open source. I also think that in the B2B world, if you serve non-developers, for example, a salesperson, HR professional, I don't think open source works there well either, because those personas won't download your open source project because they're not technical. They won't run it themselves. So think strategically about it. If open source makes sense for your business, if it doesn't help you, don't do it. Now, if you do it, I really believe that if you derive your decisions from first principles and use frameworks, you are consistent, which is great, because if you're consistent, you will build trust. And trust is critical to have a well-working community, which you need as an open source company. You need a well-working community around your open source project, and you need a good trusting relationship between you as a vendor and the open source community. So use frameworks. And I will talk about a handful of frameworks over the next 10 15 minutes. The first one is around your business model and picking the right business model. And it's I had to laugh after I created a slide, because it's less of a framework. It's more there's only one model out there that currently works, which is open core. If you zoom out and look at all the open source companies in the world, and there are many different business models, right? I mean, you can say you don't want a business model at all and don't charge for anything. You can also make money by accepting donations. But if you look at the most successful open source companies in the world, they are all currently applying an open core model. The only exception there was Red Hat, which sold to IBM and still is the largest open source exit ever, which is fantastic, but nobody ever replicated their model successfully. What Red Hat did is they open sourced everything. And then they sold a subscription around their branded and packaged version of the open source project. Open core is different. When you do open core, you don't open source everything. You open source a subset, and then you add proprietary capabilities around the open source project, and you sell those under proprietary license. And if you go top to bottom and look at all the successful open source vendors that are out there right now, they're all applying open core. MongoDB, Elastic, GitHub did, HashiCorp, Confluent, Cloudbees, they all do. You might think that SaaS is a dedicated business model. I disagree. SaaS is usually a deployment and not a business model. And if you do it, it's usually happening in the context of open core. So for example, if you look at MongoDB initially had a proprietary downloadable product, and over time then added Atlas, their SaaS product. And again, it's MongoDB, the open source project, run by MongoDB for you, and then you have additional features around it. So it's open core and not SaaS. If you really open source everything and only do SaaS, I think you have a hard time competing with other vendors that move into your space and do the same, because you can't differentiate by features because everything is open source. And that's just really tricky, especially against the large cloud providers who will do a better job than you, most likely, in running it at scale and can also just do it cheaper. So do open core. Now, if you do open core, start your company, I believe there is a really important first milestone you need to hit, which is achieving project market fit. You're probably familiar with the concept of product market fit. Product market fit means, or is this moment in time or period in time, it's really one specific moment where you feel that your product is really working well, creates sufficient value, and is pulled and by the market, and people really want to adopt it, and companies want to adopt it, versus you pushing it and you're seeing bad retention and activation metrics and all of that. Project market fit means, and it comes before that your project, because in the beginning you don't have a product, your open source project creates sufficient value, and you need to achieve that before product market fit. Now, if you jump ahead, it's not good. If you jump ahead and start to mix project and product market fit, it's really complicated, because if you have an open source project that isn't yet creating sufficient value, you don't have a community around it, you don't see a lot of pull requests or issues being raised, not a lot of activity in your IC channel or Slack, building a product around it doesn't make that much sense, because at the end of the day, you sell to your open source users, right? If you do open core, you only monetize a subset of your open source community. So the bigger the pool is, the more open source users have, the better. How do you create a really big pool list? You do it by creating an open source project that creates a lot of value. So jumping ahead is not good. Focus on your open source project, make it as successful as possible. And only once you believe that you have project market fit, which again, you know by seeing issues being raised, pull requests coming in, a community starting to build, and you're seeing companies and developers adopting your open source project. Once you see that, then think about, okay, what comes next? How do we now monetize? How do we now build a product? What features should we build on top of that open source project that we don't open source, that we then can monetize? It's happening sequentially. Don't jump ahead. Another important reason why this project market fit is so important, nowadays you are rarely, if you are starting an open source project, it's rarely the case that you're the only open source project going after a specific problem. Usually there are multiple open source projects trying to solve the same problem in slightly different ways. So you have competition between open source projects in the same way as you have competition between companies and startups. And it's crucial that you win. Your open source project should become the standard and the default choice, because if you achieve that, then the pool again is bigger, right? If let's say the total market is divided by 3 different open source projects, which are all seeing equal adoption, and then you can only sell to a subset of the users of your open source project, you're ending up selling to a fairly small part of the market usually. So if possible, try really to win your market, make the open source project really good, and then move on and focus on monetizing. All of that you need to keep in mind with fundraising. I don't think you have to raise money, right? You can bootstrap, you can build tremendous businesses without raising money, but most likely if you want to build a really big company, you will raise money, because it costs a lot of money and you need a lot of resources to build a big company. So what's fundraising? Fundraising is a series of step functions. And what I mean by that is you always have to make significant, very visible progress between your funding rounds to raise more money. Right? It can't be a little bit of marginal, incremental progress. It needs to be really a lot of progress, big difference, and then you can raise money. How do you do that? Usually, you raise some money, you achieve product market fit if you're a proprietary software vendor, and then you raise more money to really push the product into the market, and then raise more money to scale, and so on. With open source companies, all of that takes longer, because it's not just product market fit, you also have to achieve project market fit first. So keep that in mind. If you raise money early on, you need to achieve project market fit and product market fit. Ideally, you raise after project market fit. because then you raise with a lot of tailwind and a lot of momentum because your open source project is already taking off. You have quite some proof points. You can raise from better investors with better terms, which is good for you as a founder and good for you as a company. And again, don't try to jump ahead. If you are under pressure and you believe you must raise money, but the open source project isn't yet taking off, don't try to build proprietary product additionally and believe that that will help you. No, get your open source project off the ground. And if you can't wait until product market fit, then raise after project market fit, and then again after product market fit. That's still better than dabbling in both areas and then not having a lot of progress in both to show. Now, once you achieve project market fit and you're thinking about productizing and monetizing, how do you do that? Open core is the dominant and best model, but open core comes with an inherent conflict, and the conflict is that what should you open source versus what should you not open source, right? You can only make money if you decide you don't open source everything, but by definition, it's better to open source everything, right? Because then the open source project is better and is more likely to take off and get more adoption. So there's a simple framework. Open source all the developers and end user features. Keep everything for execs or organization-wide capabilities proprietary. Most likely also keep team and manager features proprietary. Two reasons for that. Execs have the budget, managers have budget. They have purchase decision. They are used to purchasing software. They all understand that purchasing is usually better than building in-house. And they can spend quite some money. So that's the obvious reason. When I say monetize exec features, just to be clear, I'm not saying you build one feature and then you only charge the 10 execs in the company or in the department for it. No. What it means is if you do, for example, user-based pricing model, you charge per seat for all developers of a given company that are using your product. And if that company wants the exec company-wide features around governance, auditability, security, user team management, whatever it is, they have to pay more for every developer seat. That is how I make a lot of money. The money argument, quite obvious. The other argument that's a little bit more hidden is that execs and also managers usually don't contribute, right? The CIO of a large bank isn't sitting at home on the weekend contributing to open source. Developers, in contrast, are, right? So if a developer is missing a certain developer feature, they will contribute it to your project, and it's hard for you to reject. A, you don't want that because it's great if developers contribute and you don't have to build it. B, if you do, it really erodes the relationship and kills the relationship with your community. Because if you reject pull requests, with the only reason being that you as a vendor want to make money, everybody knows your priorities, and that's and your priorities are set in the wrong way in that case. So you can avoid that problem by just letting developers contribute, and as long as it fits into the open source project, the code is the right quality and all of that, accept the contributions, that's great. Now, last but not least, and that's not necessarily a particular open source particular topic, moving up or down market. And what usually happens in B2B startups is, and there are some that sell to enterprises right away, great. But what you see nowadays, especially with the rise of product-led growth, is you build a product great for the end user. End user starts adopting your product, brings it into companies. There's a free tier, and then somebody can just put in a credit card, expense it. That is how you get initial adoption. And then you do team-wide sales for example, inside sales team, and then enterprise-wide deals for an enterprise sales rep. And so through that, you move up market, sell larger and larger deals, larger and larger companies. Your incentives are aligned. I mean, it gets more complicated if you move up market, but you also make much more money. Moving down market is quite hard because your incentives aren't aligned. You make less money when you move down market, so nearly nobody pulls it off. If you're an open source vendor, all of this is a little bit messier. So your project takes off, right? Your chief project market fit gets adoption. It gets adoption all over the place, small and large companies. So what do you do, right? I mean, you're all over the place. You're not starting at the bottom and you move up. You're not at the top and move down. What I recommend you do is, and it depends on your product, market, and a lot of things, but if you see enterprises adopt your project and they want certain capabilities that you believe they're willing to pay for, build those and sell a self-managed on-premise product. And that could also mean that they run it in the cloud. Don't be worried about on-prem. On-prem is not dead. It's not everything SaaS, especially in the infrastructure world. Sell self-managed product. And learn from those enterprises. Set some really clear guidelines, like it only runs on top of Kubernetes, and set really strict upgrade responsibilities and contractually, so that you don't end up with 4-year old versions in the future that you have to support. But otherwise, go sell to those enterprises, learn from them, take the money, and then really quickly also build a SaaS in parallel to monetize the more forward-looking enterprises or ones that are in non-regulated industries, and then also the SMB and mid-market and individual developers, and get the best of both worlds. So likely as an open source vendor, you do both from very early on, and serve the whole market, which again is a difference to more traditional B2B vendors. So that all being said, I know I'm a little bit over time, but I hope this was helpful, and I'm looking forward to some Q&A. And feel free to always reach out on Twitter or for any other channel and ask me any questions if you need any help. Thank you.